Part 1. The words I was never meant to hear. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. For 40 years, I was the one who woke up before sunrise to start the turkey. I was the one who carved it at the table while everyone laughed and argued about football. I was the one who made sure every chair was filled. Family meant everything to me. But that year, something felt different. I had arrived early at my son Mark's house to help prepare dinner. The air outside smelled like autumn leaves and cold wind. I carried a bag of groceries and the pumpkin pie I had baked the night before. I didn't want to come empty-handed. Mark had told me to let myself in. When I stepped into the hallway, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Mark was talking with his wife, Lauren. At first, I smiled. I thought they were discussing dinner. Then I heard the words that froze me in place. Lauren sighed loudly. "Honestly, Mark, your dad is dead weight. He ruins every Thanksgiving." My hands tightened around the pie box. Mark didn't answer right away. Then he laughed. "Yeah, sometimes I think the same thing." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Dead weight. The man who raised him. The man who worked double shifts to pay his college tuition. Dead weight. Lauren continued, her voice sharp. "He just sits there telling the same stories every year. Everyone has to pretend to enjoy it." Mark chuckled again. "Maybe next year we should just say we're traveling." They both laughed. And I stood there in the hallway, listening to my own son talk about me like I was a problem that needed solving. Something inside me cracked. But I didn't storm into the room. I didn't yell. I quietly placed the pumpkin pie on the small hallway table and stepped outside again before they even knew I had arrived. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. For years I had believed I was helping my family, helping with bills, helping with repairs, helping with childcare. But now I understood something important. To them, I wasn't family anymore. I was a burden. And in that moment, I made a decision. If they thought I was dead weight, I would remove myself completely. But not before teaching them a lesson they would never forget. A slow smile appeared on my face as I started the engine, because for the first time in my life, I finally had a plan. And by next Thanksgiving, everything would be different. If you want, I can also write Part 2 where the real revenge plan begins and the twist about the house. Money and inheritance starts. Part 2, the plan begins. I drove away from Mark's house without looking back. The pumpkin pie was still sitting on the hallway table, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one preparing Thanksgiving dinner. Instead, I parked my car at a quiet diner a few miles away. The place was half empty, filled with the smell of coffee and fried potatoes. I ordered a simple plate of eggs and toast and sat by the window. My hands were still shaking, not from anger, from clarity. For years I had ignored small signs, little comments Lauren made. The way. Mark rarely called anymore unless he needed help fixing something or paying a bill. But hearing them laugh about me like that, it opened my eyes. I finished my coffee slowly and pulled out my phone. There was someone I needed to call. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," a familiar voice answered after 2 rings. It was Daniel Carter, my lawyer. "Daniel," I said calmly, "are you busy today?" "Not for you." "What's going on?" I looked out the diner window at the empty parking lot. "I think it's time we made some changes." There was a pause. "What kind of changes?" he asked carefully. "The house," I said. "The one Mark and Lauren are living in." Daniel knew exactly what I meant. 3 years earlier, when Mark had struggled financially, I had allowed him and Lauren to move into my second property. The deed was still in my name, but they treated it like it belonged to them. "Are you thinking about selling it?" Daniel asked. "No," I replied. "I'm thinking about reminding them who owns it." Daniel chuckled quietly. "Well, that can definitely be arranged." We talked for nearly an hour. By the time I hung up, every step of my plan had begun moving. And for the first time since hearing their words, I felt calm. That evening, I returned to my quiet little house across town. I poured myself a drink and turned on the television. Thanksgiving dinner at Mark's house was probably in full swing. I imagined them sitting around the table, Lauren carving the turkey, Mark laughing with her parents, and maybe someone eventually asking where I was. Maybe they would shrug. Maybe they would say I was busy. But the truth was much simpler. I was done being the man who showed up just to be mocked behind his back. 2 days later, Daniel called me. "Everything is ready," he said. "What about the notice?" I asked. "It will be delivered tomorrow morning." I smiled. "Perfect." The next day, around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Mark. I let it ring for a few seconds before answering. "Dad?" His voice sounded confused. "Did you send some legal letter to the house?" I leaned back in my chair. "What kind of letter?" "It says we have 30 days to vacate the property," he said loudly. Lauren's voice shouted in the background. "Ask him what the hell he's doing." I kept my voice calm. "Well, Mark," I said slowly, "it is my house." Silence filled the phone. Then he spoke again, his voice tense. "But why now?" I remembered the words I had heard in the hallway. "Dead weight." "You said something recently that made me think," I replied. "What do you mean?" I paused just long enough for the words to sink in. I wouldn't want to ruin another Thanksgiving. Mark didn't speak for several seconds. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because what they didn't realize yet was this. The house wasn't the only thing I was taking back. And when the full truth came out, they would wish they had never called me dead weight. If you want, I can continue with part 3, where Mark and Lauren panic and discover the bigger secret about the property and inheritance. Part 3. The panic begins. The phone went silent after my last words. For a moment, I could hear nothing but Mark's breathing on the other end of the line. Then Lauren's voice exploded in the background. "What did he say?" Mark lowered his voice. He says it's his house." There was a pause. Then Lauren spoke again, louder this time. "That's ridiculous. We've lived here for 3 years. I almost laughed. That was exactly the problem. They had forgotten whose house it really was. Mark came back to the phone, his voice strained. Dad, this has to be a misunderstanding. Why would you send a notice like that? I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. It's not a misunderstanding, but where are we supposed to go? He asked. The question hung in the air. For years I had answered that kind of question for him. I had fixed his problems, paid his bills, covered his mistakes. But not this time. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I replied quietly. Before he could answer, Lauren grabbed the phone. Her voice was sharp and angry. You can't do this to us. Actually, I said calmly, I can. You're being petty because of some little argument. Little argument. That was how she described calling me dead weight. I smiled slightly. No argument, I said. Just a decision. She scoffed. You wouldn't survive without family, you know? That line almost made me laugh, because Lauren had no idea how wrong she was. For 40 years, I had built my own life, my own business, my own savings. And while Mark thought I was just a quiet old man living on retirement, there was a lot he didn't know. I ended the call without another word. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. This time it was Daniel. Well, he said with a chuckle, I assume they received the notice. Oh, they did. How did they react? About how you'd expect. Daniel laughed softly. Just wait until they learn the rest. That was the part I had been waiting for, because the house wasn't a real surprise. Not even close. You see, Mark believed that house was the most valuable thing connected to me. But what he didn't know, what I had never told him, was that I had sold my company 2 years earlier. The sale had been worth several $1,000,000, and all that money was sitting quietly in investments. Mark had no idea. Lauren definitely didn't know. But soon, they would. That evening, I drove past the house. Not close enough for them to see me, just close enough to watch. Mark's car was parked outside. Lauren was pacing on the porch, yelling into her phone. They looked scared. Good, because for the first time in years, they were finally realizing something. The man they had called deadweight was the one holding their entire future. And this time, I wasn't planning to carry them. If you want, I can write. Part 4 next? Where? Mark shows up at the father's house begging and the real revenge plan begins. Part 4. The visit he never expected. 3 days after the eviction notice arrived, there was a knock on my door. I already knew who it was. Mark. I opened the door slowly. He stood on the porch looking tired, his hair messy like he hadn't slept much. Behind him, Lauren sat in the passenger seat of their car, arms crossed and staring at the house like it offended her. Dad, can we talk? Mark asked quietly. For a moment, I simply looked at him. This was the same son who had once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike. Now he looked like a man who had just discovered life wasn't as easy as he thought. Come in, I said. He stepped inside and sat at the kitchen table while I poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't offer him any. That was new for both of us. Mark rubbed his hands together nervously. Dad, this eviction thing. It's really serious. Yes, I said calmly. That's the point, he sighed. Lauren and I didn't mean anything we said. I raised an eyebrow. What exactly did you say? Mark hesitated. His eyes dropped to the table. Then he whispered it. We called you. Dead weight. Hearing him say the words out loud didn't hurt as much this time. Maybe because I had already accepted the truth. Thank you for being honest, I said. Mark looked surprised. I didn't realize you heard us. I heard everything. The room fell silent. From outside, I could hear Lauren's car door slam. A moment later, she walked into the house without knocking. Mark, this is ridiculous, she said sharply. We need to handle this like adults. She looked at me. Mr. Harris, you're making a huge mistake. I took a slow sip of coffee. Am I? Yes, she replied confidently. Mark is your only son. One day he'll inherit everything anyway. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. This was never about family. It was about money. I placed my cup down on the table. Well, I said slowly, that's an interesting assumption. Lauren frowned. What does that mean? I opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents Daniel had prepared. Investment statements, property papers, trust agreements. Mark leaned forward. What is that? I slid the papers across the table. Something you should read. His eyes widened as he looked at the numbers. Lauren grabbed the papers from his hands. What is this? My financial portfolio, I said calmly. Her face went pale. You're worth this much? Mark looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? I leaned back in my chair. Because money changes how people treat you. Lauren didn't say anything now. She was staring at the papers like they might disappear. Finally, she spoke. So, if Mark apologizes, we can fix this. I shook my head slowly. No. Mark's voice cracked. What do you mean, no? I folded my hands on the table. I mean the eviction stands. Lauren's voice rose. You're being cruel. I looked directly at her. No, I said calmly. I'm being free. Mark sat there, speechless. And the truth was, they still didn't understand the most important part. because the house, the money, the investments, none of it was the real plan. The real surprise was something else entirely, something that would change their lives forever. And they were about to find out very soon. If you want, I can write part 5, where the biggest twist happens. Inheritance decision plus Thanksgiving revenge moment. Part 5, the decision. The room stayed silent after I said the eviction would stand. Mark looked like someone had just taken the ground out from under his feet. Lauren, on the other hand, was angry. Really angry. "You're doing this because of one conversation?" she snapped. "One conversation?" I repeated quietly. "Yes, you overheard something and now you're throwing your own son out of his home." I shook my head slowly. "Lauren, it was never his home." Mark rubbed his forehead. "Dad, please, we can fix this." I watched him carefully. For the first time since this all began, he looked genuinely scared, and maybe even a little ashamed. "What exactly are you trying to fix?" I asked. "The house, the situation, everything." Lauren stepped closer. "If Mark apologizes, we can move past this." I leaned back in my chair. "Move past it?" "Yes, so things can go back to the way they were?" Mark nodded. "That's all we're asking." For a moment, I didn't say anything. Then I reached into the folder again. But this time I pulled out a different document. A will. Lauren noticed immediately. "What's that?" "My will," I replied calmly. Mark blinked. "You already had a will." "Yes, but I updated it last week." Lauren's voice suddenly became careful. "What did you change?" I slid the document across the table. Mark read the first page, then the second. Then his eyes widened. "Dad." Lauren grabbed the paper from him. As she read it, the color slowly drained from her face. "This says—" "Yes," I interrupted calmly. "It says my entire estate will be donated." "Donated?" she shouted. "To a charity that builds housing for veterans." Lauren looked like someone had just told her the sky was falling. "You can't be serious." "I am." Mark stared at the table. "You're giving everything away?" "Yes." The room was completely silent. Lauren finally found her voice. "But Mark is your son, and I love him. Then why would you do this?" I looked directly at her. "Because I finally realized something." "What?" "You thought I was dead weight." Neither of them spoke. "And dead weight," I continued calmly, "doesn't leave behind anything valuable." Mark swallowed hard. "Dad, I didn't mean it like that." "I know, but words matter." Lauren suddenly slammed the paper on the table. "You're punishing us." "No," I said quietly. "I'm freeing myself." Mark looked up slowly. "Freeing yourself from what?" "Expectations." For 40 years, I had worked, saved, built. Everything I had done was for family. But somewhere along the way, family had turned into something else. Something transactional. Something that measured love in dollars. And I was done with that. I stood up from the table. Mark looked like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. As I walked to the door, I paused. One more thing, I said. They both looked up. Thanksgiving dinner this year? Mark nodded slowly. Yes? You should still celebrate. Lauren frowned. What do you mean? I opened the door. Just remember, dead weight won't be there to ruin it. And with that, I stepped outside. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger. It's simply walking away and taking your future with you